Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready to start chapter 4, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, validity, and its importance. Now, if you thought that chapter 3 was no fun, well, I'm afraid chapter 4 isn't going to get a whole lot better. These two chapters pretty much give you the theory and the mathematical evidence for these two terms, but really in general these two terms, reliability and validity, are really fairly simple concepts, and so we don't really need to make them any more complicated than they've got to be for this course. And so let's go ahead and hit the high points on validity, because we want every one of our tests to have that characteristic. Now, to define validity, it's pretty much the extent to which inferences made from a test are appropriate, meaningful, and useful, according to the American Psychological Association and the National Council on Measurement. So those are two pretty good groups to give us this definition on validity. But the degree to which you and I can make inferences from a test, I guess we need to talk a little bit about inferences. What kind of truths can you gather from that test? You say, let's say you give a test to 20 students, and 15 failed the test. And when you start looking at all of the items, you find out that some of them you didn't cover in class. Some you did. And so you can draw an inference there just to say that, certainly I need to start covering all of the information that I'm going to be testing on. But are they appropriate? Well, given the context in which we're existing in our classroom, we could probably think that the results are appropriate for our students. Let's face it, you give a test when students are just coming back from a holiday, chances are they're not going to do that great, because they probably didn't study the material over the holiday. They probably have forgotten what you did tell them before, and so those results probably are not appropriate to gauge whether the students know or understand what it is you're trying to test. Are they meaningful? Do they give any kind of insight into the true status of that learner's ability? And can we use them? I mean, that's kind of like a no-brainer right there. If we can't get some useful results from our tests to gauge student achievement, then why bother with it to begin with? So that's pretty much what we're going to kind of use to kind of describe validity in this chapter, and also for the rest of the time we're going to be in this course. Validity is going to ask the question, does my test measure what it's intended to measure? Well, how do we find out about that? How do we answer the question? We gather some evidence. And so we can look from a number of different sources to find out whether our test is valid. From expert judges would be one thing, from experts in the field, from the results of similar measures. Maybe it's a test that we've given before. That's a good test, and we can give it again and get good results, and it'd be a valid test. And test items that reflect the trait, or what it is we're trying to measure. So, does your test measure what it's intended to measure? Does the content inside of it that you have decided that you're going to test on, does it accurately reflect what is necessary for that student to know? And whether it's a paper and pencil test or whether it's a skills test or anything like that, is it going to measure what it's intended to measure? If it doesn't, it's not valid. Simple as that. You know, way back when I was my first couple of semesters in college, I had a chemistry class, and the teacher made out his test, 5 questions. He said while he was sitting in front of his TV, watching his favorite show, and he would just write down 5 questions. That's going to be your test. And that was like, we were going to have like 4 tests over the semester, 20 questions for freshman chemistry. I don't know what he was trying to measure. I don't know if he even looked in the textbook to see what he had covered. But needless to say, I failed that class twice because I really didn't know what to prepare for. But yet you can gather some evidence. Certainly if half the class or more fails your test, then you need to start asking some questions. Is the content too difficult? Was it not covered correctly? Is it appropriate? Those kinds of questions need to be asked. And let's face it, if in some of your cases you have another licensing agency has set some standards that you have to meet with no ifs, ands, or buts, then those students just aren't prepared, and it's our jobs to get them prepared. So look at the evidence to see whether or not your test is valid. Now, validity and reliability, your book kind of calls them the kissing cousins. I kind of like to call them the 2 sides of the same coin. Your test can be reliable and not valid. A test cannot be valid until it is reliable. Now, how in the world can you have that? Well, like this. Remember we talked about reliability, that it's being able to get consistent results. You and I can be right consistently. But yet, you and I can also be wrong consistently. There was a time as a Saints fan in the 70s and 80s, I would always brag to my friends and relatives that the Saints were going to win. Well, guess what? I was wrong. They might win one game every now and then, but for years and years and years, they always had losing seasons. I was consistently wrong in my estimation of their ability as a football team. But I was reliable. You could always expect me to choose the Saints to win the games that they played. Now, this point here, the second point, a test cannot be valid until it's reliable. Now, why in the world? A test cannot do what it's supposed to do, validity, until it does what it is supposed to do consistently. And that's reliability. The content of that test has to reliably measure what it is you want it to. And so for it to be reliable, it has to be valid. We don't need questions in there that have no business being there. I guess I'm going to use another example of my early days at LSU at Eunice. I had a botany teacher, one of the best teachers I ever had, but this guy was a real character. And we had a botany lab class. Learned all about plants and things like that, but yet we also had a lab with it, which was a very interesting course. But we had only 2 tests for the whole year. A midterm test that covered the first half of the course, and then a final which covered all of the second half, but also was comprehensive and covered everything in the first half. And so, you know, he told us that you've got to, you know, prepare for this test. And believe me, we had days and days of study sessions there at LSUE and at some of our homes, and so we got together to take this test. And it was pretty much an identification test. He set up stations all over the botany lab, and then had 2 bonus questions that were worth quite a bit of points. And I noticed as we would work our way to that last set of questions that were bonus questions, you would start seeing people get all kind of frustrated and bent out of shape, and the teacher was sitting there just laughing his head off. And so that kind of got me nervous as I was getting ready to do my part to get to that question. And so as we moved through the stations, I got to that bonus question, and I said, well, I'm going to nail that thing. And it was a very simple question. What is the title of your lab manual? Now, I'm going to tell you, I looked at that lab manual almost daily for a whole semester, but I could not remember the title. Now, was that a valid question? Well, in that teacher's mind, it was. In our minds, that was a total bogus question, because who cares about the title? But I guess he had to differentiate or have some kind of measure for us to get those extra points. And so, you know, I guess from a theoretical standpoint, it was a reliable question, because we all got it wrong until we started telling the people who were going to take the course next time, make sure that you know the title of the book. And that, I don't know if you still used it after that. But for you to have a test that is valid, it's got to measure what it's designed to measure and do it consistently and have reliability. And that's, you know, you can't have one without the other. You can have reliability without validity, but you can't have validity without reliability. And so just remember that. Now, what kind of types of validity can we have? Well, in general, we're looking at 3 types. Content validity, criterion validity, and there's 2 parts to that one, predictive and concurrent, and then finally construct validity. And so we're going to look at each one of those 3 here. Content validity is the property of a test such that the test items sample of the universe of the terms for which the test is designed. Now that's kind of a graduate school kind of definition, but it's very simply, it's your test items, your content is what you're covering. All the things in your course of study in which your test is designed to measure. Now, how well do all the items of the test represent all the possible items? You know, let's face it, we don't have days and days to create these tests. Usually we're we're pretty much in a bind for time, so we have to kind of look at what's important and what's not. How well do all the number of items reflect the time spent teaching the topic being tested? This is probably one of the most important things. What is important to you? What's important for your notes? What's important in your textbook that you've stressed to students that they need to know and that they would be tested on? And you create the items that you need to cover that. Now, content validity is also used for achievement tests, kind of like the compass test. ACT is always checking out the compass test to check and see if all the test items in math, reading, and English are appropriate. In fact, they have just done a major overhaul of the compass test, I think during the summer of this year. We had gotten some emails that they were going through some major revisions and that they were going to be doing some updates to reflect those updates, and that we were going to have to go into our computers and delete some files in preparation for that, and then they would automatically do updates for us that would bring a whole new set of test questions into those testing computers that we have at our school in order to make sure that they were valid. And so we did that, and it took us about a day or so to make that take place, but it went without a hitch. And so now students that take the compass test every Tuesday at our school now have the most up-to-date and valid compass questions that the compass test can pull from as they're tested. And so, content validity. What is it you're covering? Now, criterion validity. It assesses whether a test reflects a set of abilities in a current or concurrent or future predictive setting as measured by some other test. Now, I don't know about you, that sounds kind of confusing, so let's see what they're talking about here. Concurrent validity describes how well does my test correlate with the outcomes of a similar test right now. Alright, for example, I'm doing this little taping right now on a Monday night. Tomorrow, Tuesday, we're going to have a bunch of students come in and test with Compass. And they'll all take English, math, and reading. And then we are going to evaluate some scores to see whether or not they made the scores to get into their program of study. To check out whether the Compass test has some concurrent validity, we would take a similar test like the ASSET, which is a form of the Compass test, but better yet, maybe the TABE test, which is the test of adult learning, or something like that. And so if we would give the same students the TABE test, question would be, would they still get the passing scores? Would their scores be the same? Would they be better? Would they be worse? Now, the only way that you can measure whether your test is accurate is to measure it up against another test. Because if you measure it against yourself, you're really not doing anything at all there. And so you could kind of measure your test against a number of other similar tests and see if it's got some concurrent validity to it. Predictive validity is how well does my test predict performance on a similar measure in the future. Well, we'll the compass test tomorrow yield the same results a year from now, 2 years from now? That's the kind of question you need to ask. Now, normally, a lot of us just make a test and we keep using the same test over and over and over again. Well, we all know our curriculums change all the time. Students kind of start passing out answers. And so we may not be able to predict its validity very well because, the test may get compromised by forces outside of it that you and I really don't have a whole lot of control over. These kind of things, may not be important to us, but yet for companies like ACT, TABE, and all of these others, this is crucial. SATs, scholastic aptitude, they are really concerned about these kinds of things to make sure that the performance you get right now is the same that you're going to get in the future, and also it was the same that you could get in the past, that there's some consistency there as people take the test. So as we move on, construct validity. It's the most interesting and the most difficult source of validity to establish. All right, construct validity is a group of interrelated variables such as aggression, hope, intelligence, and you want your construct to correlate with related behaviors and not correlate with behaviors that are not related. Now, this is a little bit different and a little bit more difficult to kind of get a handle on. Whenever you're looking at emotions, things that kind of go beyond our senses, that, like hope, our intelligence quotient, our IQ. Every person's different. Every person defines their hopes, their dreams, their degree of anger, their character differently. And so you try to take this test or measure and correlate it with related types of behavior. Let's say you're given a personality test or questionnaire to students to find out maybe what career might be one that they would like to pursue. And so you kind of find out what they're interested in. And so you can kind of cluster jobs together that might be very similar. Career clusters like accounting, drafting, machine shop would all be programs of study that would be very heavy with the math because you're doing calculations all the time. Programs that, like welding, diesel mechanics, auto mechanics, and maybe there's some others that I'm just not thinking of right offhand, or maybe culinary arts, or those kinds of programs that are very strong in the manipulative kind of things. You got to use your hands a lot. Or else another term for that would be psychomotor. You're using your brain and your hands together to get things done. To tighten up bolts, to peel potatoes, tear down engines, weld pipe. Takes a lot of manipulations. Hand-eye coordination, things like that. Those are the kinds of behaviors that you would kind of try to cluster together, and they're interrelated, even though the careers might be very, very different. And so that's what construct validity is all about, trying to match up behaviors, match up abilities and things like that that may go across boundaries between different types of behaviors, different types of actions, and things like that. I know this isn't very concrete, but still construct validity does have its place in testing. Maybe not to the extent that you and I would need. And then what we have is a multi-trait, multi-method matrix that kind of gives a graphical way to kind of look at construct validity. That's in your textbook. It's figure 4.1. And so you see these things like observations, self-rapport, teacher ratings versus the same thing here. Observation, self-report, teacher ratings, but then you look at aggression here, intelligence, and then you go from a very high down to a very low category, and then you kind of, match everything up here from what you measure. And so I don't know if we'd ever even kind of consider anything like that, but that's pretty much how the little table is set up there. And so here's your little summary on how your different types of validity work. Content gives you when to use it, when you want to know whether sample items truly reflect the entire universe of items in a certain topic, how you do it, and then some examples. My weekly quiz in my stat class fairly assessed the chapter's content. Okay, great. It has some content validity. Alright. Now, criterion validity. The EATS test of culinary skills have been shown to be correlated with being a fine chef 2 years after culinary school. Alright. You do well on this EATS test, and I couldn't tell you what it covers, but yet you pass that test, chances are you're going to be a successful chef. You got some predictive ability to it. And finally, construct. When you want to know if a test measures something, some kind of underlying psychological construct, it's true men who participate in body contact and physically dangerous sports score higher on the test of aggression. Okay, well, maybe it's due to higher levels of testosterone. I don't know. But this is a test of aggression that helps them to see whether or not you're prone to doing those kinds of things. So, content validity, criterion validity, construct validity. Big three for validity.